Hi, everybody, and welcome. I am Dr. Ellie Anderson, co-host of Overthink podcast and YouTube channel, and also a member of the outreach committee for SPEP, which is the Society for Phenomenology and Existential Philosophy. I am here today we're coming at you live from the SPEP conference with my phone set up. And so I'm sorry that the sound quality and lighting is not ideal, but we're working with what we have. I'm in Rochester at the conference right now with Dr. Johanna Oksala, who is Arthur J. Schmitt Professor of Philosophy at Loyola University of Chicago.
That's right.
And we're here today to talk about Dr. Oksala's 2023 book, Feminism, Capitalism, and Ecology. Welcome.
Thanks a lot, Ellie. It's great to be here. It's been a hectic conference, but I'm glad we managed to make some time for this.
Absolutely. And I think there's something really special about speaking to scholars about their projects, while we're at this sort of conference, and you just had a panel featuring your book. And so, the purpose of this is to sort of talk about your ideas and think about what are the main ideas that you think might be relevant beyond the very small confines of the academic conference where we are now? What would you want to tell people about this project?
Right.
So, tell us about your book.
Yeah, okay, I think that's really great, because it's true that we don't often get to talk about our books beyond these, the people in our little world in some ways. So this is a great opportunity. Okay, what my book is about. In one sentence, it's an attempt to bring together ecological and feminist critiques of capitalism into a coherent framework. So that's what I'm trying to do. And the starting point really is the ecological catastrophe, the crisis that we are, facing at the moment. And I think that any political movement, any theoretical movement needs to grapple with it. To be relevant today, we need to be able to think through that, and that includes feminism. So I think feminism needs to take on board what's going on in terms of the environmental crisis, but also vice versa. I think environmentalism needs feminism. I think environmentalism needs to be connected to, fundamental issues of social justice, including, gender subordination.
Okay. Yeah, and so tell us a little bit about what the ecological critiques of capitalism and feminist critiques of capitalism that particularly interest you are, and how are you seeing those two strands of thinking in dialogue?
A lot of, when ecofeminism emerged in the 70s and 80s, alongside the environmental movement, it produced, groundbreaking analysis of the connections between the environmental devastation and gender oppression, both metaphysical and historical links, showing how nature has been feminized, and on the other hand, women have been naturalized. But also really important, concrete empirical analysis showing how environmental destruction really affects marginalized groups, such as women, who concretely depend on the environment. They are often responsible for the small-scale subsistence farming. They have to fetch water. They have to fetch food, wood. Environmental devastation affects them directly, very concretely. So I think ecofeminism was making really important inroads. But then for some reason, it was kind of, pushed to the margins of feminist theory. And there are various reasons for that. It was accused of essentialism, of, merely reinforcing this connection between nature and women that feminism has really problematized and has to problematize.
Yeah, this idea that women are bodies, they're like naturally more connected to the earth than men are.
Exactly.
A lot of those ideas that I think we're critical of.
Exactly, and of course for good reasons,
Yeah.
because those are exactly the ideas that feminism has been fighting against. Biology is not destiny and all that. But I think in that critique, we also lost a lot of important ideas. So I think that now is a good moment to reassess ecofeminism, to update it in some ways, some important ways, but also to develop forms of it that can respond to our specific problems today.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I think that the kind of key the key point that I want to make about what kind of ecofeminism we need today is that I think it needs to be connected to critiques of capitalism. So forms of ecofeminism that are just about protecting nature somewhere, outside of capitalist markets, or that's just concerned about, protecting the wildlife, or something. That's not enough. We need to actually target the key cause, the roots of our environmental crisis, and that is capitalism.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about that, because on the one hand, it seems with ecological critiques of capitalism, I mean, obviously this is a whole field that I can't summarize in a short, pithy statement, but there are ideas about how capitalism very obviously has been the primary cause in our current ecological crisis of human-made climate change, whether it's through industrialization, deforestation, rerouting of water, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have feminist critiques of capitalism, which often have to do with the way that women's bodies are a sort of site of reproduction of the labor market, and that women's bodies are commodified, et cetera. And so I guess I'm curious how you're thinking about capitalism here, and what are the key features of capitalism that you think are the problems?
I mean, I think the kind of big contradiction that I highlight is the one that I think all environmental critiques of capitalism highlight, is that a system that's basically dependent on constant economic growth on a finite planet is inevitably going to,
Surprise, surprise, that doesn't work.
It's not a very difficult argument. It's not a very complex argument. And it's I'm certainly not the first one who's making it. It's the planet cannot take that. We have no planet B. That's the slogan of a lot of environmental politics. So I think that's a big issue. And I think that has consequences for how we need to think about, our economy, and how we need to think about our division of labor, how we need to think about work, how we need to think about what kinds of values we want to promote. And it has got to do with, women's role in that division of labor and their traditional work. But more directly, it's connected with gender oppression through this idea that one of the contradictions of capitalism is also that there's a lot of free riding, what could be called free riding, Capitalism is free riding on a lot of natural resources that it's basically, using for free. And, dumping of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is a form of that, It's not paying the full cost of what it actually, is doing. And we are running out of space in the atmosphere, basically, that space is not free space that's just there, And I'm trying to show that there's an analogous problem with the care work that's done. Of course, care work is not done solely by women, but it is a gendered form of work in our form of life. And there's a lot of free riding on that too, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So it's like the capitalist economy couldn't function if there wasn't a lot of free care work being done in, the private realm. Taking care of children, not just giving birth to them, but, caring for them, educating them, taking care of, sick people, old people, basically people who cannot be productive members of the economy. And that is, as we see, is a kind of a crisis too, the crisis of care. We just don't have enough people who do that work, and that work is not really compensated, and it's often underpaid, racialized women who do it.
And I think a lot of times when people are hearing these analyses, so something like as big as, okay, we need to critique and maybe overthrow capitalism in order to achieve ecological and feminist justice, there can be a sense of despair that arises. A lot of people talk about climate despair nowadays. And I think on the one hand, it's not the role of the theorist to immediately jump in and resolve that despair. I often get impatient when people are like, well, what's the takeaway? Or like, what's the policy? And it's like, that's actually not our job as theorists. We can offer speculations, but like to offer an account is enough. That's like more our area of expertise. That said, I am curious if you have responses, because I'm sure this comes up in conversations for you a lot, about how to deal with the fact that these things just feel so overwhelming, both on a personal and social or political level.
Right. I think you're absolutely right that this is also something that's, I think, really tangible, is what's sometimes called climate anxiety. People are anxious, they're worried, and they feel despair. And I have another article that's not part of that book where I actually engage precisely with that phenomenon, and I kind of link it to the philosophical tradition of anxiety being, for thinkers like Heidegger, Sartre, Kierkegaard, that tradition where anxiety is an important experience. It's an experience that you kind of have to go through to realize that we need to re-evaluate what's going on, and we need to somehow engage with those conditions that create the human world. And I think, of course, some kind of political activism is one way of dealing with that. If you read articles of these young climate activists, they almost invariably say that their activism was a response to this. They felt like devastated by what's going on, and this is what helps them. But I mean, it's true that the book is not like a political manifesto. It's a philosophical analysis that tries to make like careful distinctions and show through a variety of arguments what's going on and so on. But I do make some concrete suggestions. So I make a qualified, there's a qualified defense of the universal basic income, for example, because I think this is, of course, I'm not, again, the only person who is promoting that, but I think it's one way to deal with both the problems of how to imagine a society that's not built on just constant economic growth. There needs to be like scaling back of work, of certain type of work. Work where we just try to produce stuff to make money for corporations, and instead we need more work, for example, care work, you know? So we need a move away from what I and some other critics call the servant economy.
Yeah.
You know? And we need more time to do some care work ourselves, you know?
Oh my gosh, that it's just like hitting home for me a lot right now as like my parents are beginning to age and we're having so many family conversations about what do we do with the fact that our family is divided between full-time workers and those who, you know, are retired or don't or can't work. And it's just like a constant problem, especially living in the US, because unlike Finland where you're from, we have very little social safety net for long-term health care.
No, for sure. And I think, I also feel that there's a lot of emphasis in feminist theory on obviously the problems of childcare. You know, this I think, you know, this is clearly a problem. But I think you're absolutely right. As people are getting older and older, there's also a problem at the other end, you know? Yeah. We, you know, our loved ones are getting older and we are concerned about, you know, how they're going to be cared, who's going to care for them.
Totally. And I recently came across the term sandwich generation to describe my millennial generation, where many of us, because many of us are, if we're having kids at all, we're having them later than previous generations, and also because of the fact that the boomer generation, which are like mostly our parents, or our parents are mostly from the boomer generation, because they are living longer and they're also such a large generation, we often find ourselves having to undertake elder care while also having to undertake care of young children, and sometimes having to actually decide between the two. And that I think is like a very troubling phenomenon when we are also facing down the possibility of climate catastrophe and the very real effects of climate change in the world at this particular moment.
Right. No, for sure. I think there are like multiple crises that are coming together. Yeah. And I think that's one, I think that could be one way of describing the project, that it's trying to show some connections between them, but also show how we can't solve one without somehow, you know, tying those solutions together. Yeah. And I feel that there's forms of feminism that are kind of liberal feminism that are not exactly, you know, helpful in terms of solving some of the key environmental problems today.
Say more about that.
Because, you know, if we really want to take seriously the role that capitalism plays in fueling the economic crisis, then simply trying to, you know, improve women's position in that economic system, you know, to make sure that they too can become CEOs and make ton of money. Yeah. It's kind of like, you know, that's not really the project that we should be focusing on.
And I think that idea that sort of lean-in feminism is not genuine feminism is something you see a lot. And what I'm also hearing you say, though, is, okay, not only is it not genuine feminism, it's actually also actively inhibiting other very important and interconnected forms of justice, such as climate justice.
Climate justice. And it also makes it difficult to build the kind of solidarity between different groups of women, you know, that I think we need. Yeah. And of course, not just, you know, groups of women, but more broadly, because, you know, the problems with our gender system, if we want to use a larger term, you know, includes everybody, you know. Totally. Men, non-binary people, you know, it's not ultimately, you know, a kind of a single issue project.
Of course. Yeah, and so I'm curious to think, I know something that came up in your book session here at SPEP was the question of surrogacy. So maybe you could say a little bit about how you're viewing surrogacy in the book.
Sure. I mean, surrogacy is not like the main topic of the book, but there's one chapter in which I investigate it in connection with this idea of what's sometimes called biocapitalism. So there's a lot of literature on biocapitalism, the idea that the very rapid development of biotechnology combined with global capitalism has created a kind of a new nexus of problems. We can do stuff now with biotechnology that were science fiction decades ago, and the reach of capitalism is totally global now, and this nexus then has created markets like the transnational commercial gestational surrogacy. So the surrogacy chapter is trying to study the problems that emerge from this connection, where we can now marketize biological processes of the human body in a way that was unthinkable, and the kinds of problems that arise, not just economic problems. I mean, this of course makes possible new forms of exploitation and expropriation that were difficult to imagine. But I think there are also new kinds of ethical issues about new kinds of kinship relations, and this is of course one of the issues that is debated in connection with gestational surrogacy. And I'm not taking a kind of a moralizing stance on it. I'm not saying feminists should simply be against it, but we should raise some critical questions about it, and perhaps try and imagine, push our thinking in terms of what kind of opportunities it opens up for queering the nuclear family, but also do that whilst recognizing the lived embodied experience of the surrogates themselves. And the kinds of connection that they often feel to the baby, at least according to the ethnographic studies that I have read.
So they're not just like a temporary vessel or instrument for having a child, and they get paid for their services, and then that's the end of the story. Because
that's kind of the framework that is presented, and often they are kind of told that this is how they should think about this process, that they are just renting out the space in their body. But
I don't think renting out the space in your body is how pregnancy works.
But a lot of people don't experience it like that. So I think some kind of nuance needs to be, like some kind of philosophical questions need to be raised there, that are not just simply moralizing questions, but nevertheless kind of recognize that there's some kind of an ethical dimension here that needs to also be explored, not just questions of exploitation.
Okay. Well, we're approaching the end of our time. I want to ask you a final question, which is, who did you write this book for, and who are you hoping will read it?
I'm hoping everybody will read it. I'm hoping everybody will read it. Everybody who's interested in what's going on.
Okay.
But I guess my more specific audience is, I wanted to, in a sense, make an intervention into ecofeminism by, foregrounding critiques of capitalism, but also to try and make clear that I think ecofeminism is something relevant, if we can, sort of tweak it to match our times. It's not like this outdated thing that, these goddess worshipping women, just like anti-intellectual, that's not what it is.
Yeah.
You know, it's a serious philosophical. It can be a serious philosophical stance.
And that seems like a particularly important thing to say in this moment when I think we're seeing a lot of the trad wife movement and a lot of like return to nature, divine feminine discourse that I find very troubling from a feminist standpoint.
For sure. I think exactly. So I think that there needs to be a kind of there needs to be a strand of feminism, ecofeminism, that's not decentralizing, that's recognizing, you know, that gender is not binary, that's taking into account, you know, the developments of queer theory, of critical race theory, of critical animal studies, all of that. But that, you know, but we need ecofeminism of that type. But also the book is an intervention into perhaps most to Marxist feminist debates. I see this as also as a Marxist feminist book.
Okay.
So
anyone and everyone, and also Marxist feminists specifically. Thank you so much, Dr. Oksala. It's such a pleasure to speak with you about this. So many good pearls of wisdom in this conversation. We have been coming to you live from the SPEP conference. Thank you so much, and we hope you will check out Feminism, Capitalism, and Ecology.
Thank you. Thanks, Ellie.